Chapter 580. Tiger's man couldn't help but pause. Originally, he wanted to leave some people behind in the dark. Although he believed that with just him and Beta Persei around, no matter how many people came, it would be difficult to get past them and reach the young master. But wouldn't it be better to leave one more person behind? But now that Yang Qindong added on, he finally calmed down. That's right. To be able to cause the security squad to be somewhat helpless, one could imagine the strength and combat strength of the enemy. If you want to leave someone behind without being discovered by them, that would be even more impossible. Tiger's man walked out of the headquarters with his head lowered. He called the captain of the first guard team, Chiu V. Captain Chiu, if the enemy appears again, can you go and destroy them? Tiger's man's murderous aura overflowed as he said these words. It was obvious that he was really angered by these killers who seemed to be everywhere. The enemies were difficult to deal with because they relied on the darkness and were very agile. Once they were discovered, those people would immediately retreat frantically. However, the guard team could only stay in place due to their duties. Naturally, they would suffer a little. However, Chou Wu immediately regained his confidence when he heard that they could chase after the enemy. He patted his chest and said like a soldier, "Who too, if you let us out, I guarantee that we can kill those shameful bastards until they cry for their parents. None of them will be left alive. Okay, then if the enemy appears to harass us later, you guys will chase after them and kill them. Remember, you must end the battle quickly. Also, send out the first guard team." Tiger's man was a little reluctant when he said this. When Chiu V heard that he could go out and kill the enemy, he was so happy that he was about to agree. But when he suddenly heard that he was going to send them all out, he couldn't help but be stunned. If we send them all out, who will be responsible for the safety of the sixth young master? That's exactly what the young master meant. He was worried that it would be dangerous if too few people went out, so he sent everyone out. Naturally, Beta Persei and I will be responsible for the safety here. If you're really worried, then go and come back quickly. This is a military order. Execute it. After saying this, Tiger's man turned around and walked towards the command center. He was worried that he would change his mind if he stayed any longer. Although he had never disobeyed Yang Qindong's orders, for some reason, he couldn't help but do it this time. Chiu V was left standing on the spot with a dumbfounded expression. With his intelligence, he quickly realized that this must be the sixth young master's plan to lure the snake out of its hole. When he recalled how the sixth young master had toyed with the security team, he couldn't help but say, with the sixth young master's ability, there shouldn't be anyone who can hurt him. But for safety's sake, I should finish this quickly and come back to support him. As if he had made a decision, Chiu V began to assemble the first security team. After a while, gunshots rang out from outside again, and then they went further and further away. In the command center, when gunshots rang out again, Tiger's man walked out of the door alone. Then, he held a triage bayonet in his hand and stood there like an ordinary guard. He knew very well that when masters fought, the ability of the gun in their hands was limited. Even at close range, the enemy would not give you any chance to shoot. Since that was the case, it was safer to just hold the bayonet. Beta Persei did not leave. He stood guard in the inner door of the command center and did not take anything. This was because his weapon was a pair of iron fists. In addition, he was tall and strong to begin with. At this time, he stood there like a door god. On the other hand, Yang Qindong did not seem to take what was happening outside seriously. He was still standing in front of the sand table, looking at the situation of both sides and imagining what the front line had become. 500 meters away from the command center, 10 black figures were slowly approaching. They were all dressed in black and walked in the dark. Their footsteps were extremely light, and their speed was very fast. Even the night vision goggles could not capture their figures. You sent them all out? Hee, this loyal duke is really young and full of vigor. He is very arrogant. A black-clothed man said, and the corners of his mouth revealed a creepy smile. That's right, he is indeed very arrogant. However, since he doesn't put us in his eyes, he can only suffer the consequences of his own actions. Brother Shen, this time, our names will go down in history. Another black-clothed man chuckled coldly. If the king of Jianghu, Li, was here, he would definitely recognize that the person who spoke was his adopted son, Li Min, who was known as the top master in Jianghu. As for the brother Shen he was talking about, it was naturally the messenger sent by Baiming, Shen Kun. The situation at the front line was not satisfactory. The mercenaries suddenly turned around and attacked. They did not cherish the lives of the Han people during the day. This indeed caught Fan Yuhai off guard. However, this also gave the two of them an opportunity. They led their most elite subordinates through the edge of the battlefield and arrived at the rear. When they thought of the possibility of meeting the Ming dynasty's loyal duke and even killing him, the two of them could not help but feel their blood boil. However, they were disappointed to see that there were dozens of guards here. Moreover, each of them had extraordinary skills. The aura they exuded was even stronger than ordinary martial artists. No matter how confidently Min and Shen Kun were, they could not guarantee that they could break through these guards and arrive in front of Yang Chendong. However, if they were to leave just like that, they would be unwilling to do so. This was why they constantly harassed and even injured people with arrows in their sleeves. Originally, they wanted to annoy Yang Chendong. If he hid in his shell like a coward and did not come out, then they would continuously attack him. Even if they could not hurt him, they would make him angry. Perhaps the opportunity would come when he was angry. However, they did not expect that after just 3 rounds of harassment, these guards would actually rush out. This sudden turn of events made Li and Shen Kun very agitated. They tried to send a group of people to lure these guards further and further away, and then sent a second group of people to test the waters. Sure enough, these guards rushed out again. They counted a total of 60 people. In other words, the loyal duke should not have any forces around him. So, it was time for them to make a move. This was definitely an opportunity, although it looked more like a trap. But no matter what, they had to take a gamble, because if they did not gamble now, they were afraid that it would be very difficult to find such an opportunity in the future. So they appeared. After leaving more than a dozen people in the periphery responsible for restraining the guards who might come back at any time, each of them took 4 of their most elite subordinates and appeared. All of you, listen carefully. In a while, we will attack with all our might. We don't need to kill the enemy immediately. Just keep the 2 of them occupied. We don't have much time. Those brothers lured the guards away with the determination to die. At most, we have the time for an incense stick to burn. If we still don't succeed, we will retreat immediately and look for another opportunity. Li Min was the one who spoke. As he spoke, the corners of his mouth twitched. His heart ached for Yang Chendong. The people he brought with him this time were all experts who had followed him for many years. They could be considered as men of sacrifice. These people risked their lives to lure away the guards in order to create enough opportunities for them. When he thought of the possibility of killing Yang Chendong, and the possibility that his men would not be able to survive, he felt as if his heart had been cut by a knife. At this moment, he hated Yang Chendong even more. He believed that all the results were caused by this person. This was what it meant to condemn someone. When a person always wants to harm others, and therefore has to pay some price, they will still put the blame on the victim. Do they have to think that when they want to harm others, others should stand there and let them be cut into pieces? Is that the right thing to do? At the entrance of the headquarters, Tiger's Mane had already extinguished the torch inserted here. He stood in the darkness, opened up his 5 senses, and carefully and cautiously observed everything around him. If he alone could eliminate the assassins who came out of nowhere, young master would not have to take the risk. This was naturally the best outcome. So at this moment, Tiger's Mane was full of fighting spirit and murderous intent. His whole body was focused, waiting for the enemy to appear. Whoosh! A small arrow suddenly shot out from the darkness, aiming at the position where Tiger's mane was standing. In the darkness, the direction of the arrow could not be seen at all. Only a murderous aura appeared in the air. The previous guard was injured by this sudden arrow because of his carelessness. However, if they wanted to use the same method to deal with Tiger's mane, it was obviously not enough. Tiger's mane suddenly jumped to the side, feeling the danger, and dodged the attack. At the same time, as he fell to the ground, his roar spread in all directions. "Who are you? You only know how to plot against me." Just as the words left his mouth and his body came into close contact with the ground, four saber cheese suddenly slashed towards him from different directions. Ding ding dang dang. In that moment, Tiger's mane's military knife collided with the four steel swords. The four assassins suddenly appeared, suddenly attacked, and suddenly attacked, in order to injure Tiger's mane in the shortest time possible. Since he was able to stand guard outside the command center, his skills must not be simple. Perhaps this was what the Duke of Loyalty relied on. Thinking about it, if he killed this pillar of support, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's expression would be very good. Although the four assassins thought highly of Tiger's mane's ability and attacked with all their strength, they still did not injure the opponent. Instead, Tiger's mane stood up like a carp and laughed. "So it's four reckless dogs, bark. Watch me take your lives." Tiger's mane would not shout for no reason. This was to remind young master in the headquarters that four enemies had appeared. Chapter 581. The military knife in his hand shone with a cold light. In an extremely short period of time, Hu Mang had exchanged more than 10 blows with the four of them. He had also slowly changed from his initial arrogance to defense. The strength of these four people was too strong, especially when they were using a joint attack technique. When the two of them worked together, they were able to exert a combat power that was several times higher than their own strength. If it was one-on-one, Tiger's mane was confident that he could take down any one of them within 10 moves. However, in the face of a joint attack technique and four opponents at that, he was a little overwhelmed and had no choice but to switch from attacking to defending. In the command center, the sound of weapons colliding could be heard from outside. Beta Persei, who was standing there, felt his heart throb. Obviously, he was affected by the murderous aura outside and could not help but feel his hands and feet itch. "Go, help Tiger's mane. I can feel that the people who are coming are not weak." Yang Chendong finally stopped looking at the sand table and said to Beta Persei very seriously, "Young master, I have to protect your safety." Beta Persei also knew the urgency of the situation and even knew what his mission was. This was one of the rare occasions when Beta Persei obeyed orders and did not carry out them. He looked at Yang Chendong with amusement. "Well, don't you know the strength of the young master? You have to have confidence in your young master. Go." Yang Chendong chuckled. Oh. It was unknown if Yang Chendong's smile had infected Beta Persei, or if he really had great confidence in the strength of the young master. After agreeing, Beta Persei pulled open the curtain of the command center and rushed out. "Tiger's mane, you're too weak. Let me help you. Get lost. Go back and protect the young master. You're not needed here." Even though Tiger's mane had already been forced back a few steps, his voice still rang out like a roar. Unfortunately, Beta Persei came under the orders of the sixth young master. How could he care about Tiger's mane? He roared and rushed into the battle, instantly sharing the firepower and attracting the attention of the other two players. Because of this, Tiger's mane's pressure was reduced. Finally, he no longer had to retreat and defend passively. He could now consider counterattacking and killing the enemy. However, before they could start their counterattack, another four shadowy figures jumped out and surrounded them. There were a total of 8 of them, and this was the last of Shen Kuan's strength. With another 4 people joining in, it was now 2 against 8. Naturally, the pressure was not small. Fortunately, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei often worked together over the years, especially when dealing with Yang Chendong. They had formed a tacit understanding. In addition, Beta Persei was still a little better than Tiger's Mane in terms of skill. Although it was only a little, it could often determine the final outcome. Whoosh! While they were fighting happily, two more shadowy figures suddenly appeared and rushed to the command center. They were the leaders of this assassination, Li Min and Shen Kun. They were both absolute masters and had reached the ability to identify people by breathing. After they knew that there was only a single breath in the command center, they knew that the best opportunity had come. They rushed in without hesitation. Unlike outside, there were a few kerosene lamps lit in the command center, making it as bright as day. Therefore, when Li Min and Shen Kun rushed in, they couldn't help but squint their eyes to adapt to the environment. When they saw that Yang Chendong was indeed the only one there, the two of them laughed mischievously. While they were laughing, Yang Chendong was also laughing. Both of you, I'm Yang Chendong, the Great Ming's loyal duke. May I know your name? Do you want to know our names and origins and then take revenge afterwards? Let me tell you, no way. A sneer flashed across Shen Kun's face. Although he didn't think that Yang Chendong could still live past today, who knew if the other party still had any tricks up his sleeve? If he reported his name and word got out, wouldn't it be a pile of shit whether he killed him or not? Shen Kun had no intention of reporting his name. He just wanted to complete the mission as soon as possible. He even couldn't help but attack. However, Li Min reached out and stopped him. Then, he looked at Yang Chendong with an arrogant expression and said, "A real man doesn't change his name or surname. I'm Li Min, the adopted son of the king of Jianghu. He Shen Kun, Bai Ming's special envoy. Brotherly, you." Shen Kun didn't expect Li Min to sell him out directly. Anger appeared on his face. "Brother Shen, don't be angry. Do you think that he can still escape from the joint attack of the two of us? Even if he has some tricks up his sleeve, no one can save him at such a close distance. Don't worry." Li Min smiled at Shen Kun and looked at Yang Chendong again. She said in a condescending manner, "Promise me one thing and I'll let you die quickly so you won't have to suffer so much." "Condition? Let's hear it." Yang Chendong had a curious look on his face. "Immediately write an order to release my adopted father and allow him to establish a new kingdom." Li Min's voice was very firm, as if he was ordering something. Just now, Yang Chendong was still curious as to how the other party had exposed his identity. His question was just a casual thought. He didn't think that the other party would really reveal his identity and origin. Only now did he understand that Li Min still had the idea of helping her foster father, Li, restore the country. The person who attacked was naturally Li Min. With a horizontal strike of her blade, she blocked the attack of the long sword. However, because of this, anger appeared on Shen Kun's face. "Li Min, why did you stop me?" "Wait a minute. I haven't asked him to write the military order yet. He can't die." Li Min shook his head. Although he said that he wanted to negotiate, his face was very firm. "You." Shen Kun wanted to scold him for being an idiot. However, considering that he was no match for him, he could only snort coldly and stand aside. From the looks of it, it was clear that Li Min was going to take control of the situation. Just now when he attacked, Yang Chendong stood there like a fool and didn't move at all. This gave the two killers incomparable confidence. This Yang Chendong was really a scholar who couldn't even trust a chicken. Li Min naturally saw Yang Chendong's performance just now. Now she was very confident. She looked at Yang Chendong with a look of charity and said, "I said, write the military order immediately. Otherwise, not only will you die, but you will also die very miserably. TSK, as if you won't kill me if I write it." Yang Chendong snorted and looked very clear. "Duke of Loyalty, you have to know that there are several kinds of death. One kind is called living a life worse than death. I don't know if you want to have a taste of it. Li Min threatened again. At the same time, she admired Yang Chendong's performance in her heart. He was worthy of being called the god of war. At least this kind of determination was something that few people could match. I don't want to. Yang Chendong said without any surprise. This also made Li Min's eyes flash with pride. Just when she thought that she had scared the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong suddenly said, "Who do you think you are? Can you really hurt me? It's better to kneel down and surrender now. Maybe I can give you a quick death if I'm happy. Otherwise, I think you don't want to taste the feeling of living a life worse than death." Chapter 582. What? He originally thought that the other party had given in, but unexpectedly, the other party began to threaten him. Li Min, who thought that he had misheard, widened his eyes in disbelief. On the other hand, Shen Kun clearly heard the words just now. Although he did not know where Yang Chendong's confidence came from, he did not mind him repeating the words just now. Brotherly, he wants you to learn from a dog and kneel on the ground and beg for surrender. Do you really not want to live anymore? Li Min's face was flushed red. Obviously, he was very angry. The veins on his right hand that was holding the knife suddenly popped out. He looked like he was going to kill someone at any time. Shen Kun's words had provoked him to the point that he wanted to kill someone. "Tsk, as if you said that you won't do anything to me." Yang Chendong rolled his eyes and said as if he was joking. "Very well, then I will kill and cut off your legs. Anyway, I don't need them to write." Li Min, who had been successfully enraged, decided to give Yang Chendong a taste of his strength first. Anyway, he did not intend to let the other party die so easily. He would slowly torture him. He raised his right hand, and the knife was like a gust of wind, directly chopping towards Yang Chendong's legs. Li Min did not intend to hold back this time. This was originally a game of life and death. Whoever had a merciful heart did not deserve to play this game of death. Shen Kun watched from the side. Yang Chendong, who had lost his legs, could no longer pose any threat to Bai Ming. After all, have you ever seen a powerful person who did not even have legs? How could such a person be qualified to compete for the world's hegemony? Under the gaze of both sides, Yang Chendong, who seemed to be dead for sure, smiled at this moment. Did he really think that he was a soft persimmon? Did he think that he could teach him a lesson with a knife? Well, then he would use facts to prove that anyone who dared to look down on him would have to pay a heavy price, or even lose their lives. Even before the saber arrived, it brought with it a wave of saber energy. If an ordinary person were to face this saber attack, they would be scared silly. Li Min and Shen Kun were also looking forward to seeing Yang Chendong's stupefied expression. However, they were destined to be disappointed. Just as the blade was about to reach his legs, the sixth young master leaped into the air and easily dodged the blade. While he was still in mid-air, he executed a divine dragon tail whip. His feet, which were clad in military boots, smashed towards Li Min's shoulder like a huge rock. Feeling the power of this kick, Li Min's expression changed greatly. He had a feeling that if this kick landed, his shoulder blade would be completely shattered. At the critical moment, he hurriedly retreated, wanting to avoid this heavy blow. As expected of the number one expert in the Jiaoxi kingdom, Li Min's reaction was as quick as a fox, causing the huge foot to miss. Just as he was about to stabilize his body, he was drenched in cold sweat. Another kick was aimed at his face. Bang! The heavy blow landed on his face like a ruthless slap. Under the force of the kick, Li Min's entire body spun 360 degrees and then fell to the ground with a thud. Chain kick. Shen Kun, who originally wanted to watch the show, suddenly spoke up. Then, he put away his careless expression and became serious. Wrong, it's 3 consecutive kicks. Both of his feet had already landed on the ground, and he said with a face full of arrogance. Originally, his personality was not that serious. However, due to his position, he had to make some changes. Usually, other than when he was with his wives, he had to pretend to be deep and serious. Now that there were no outsiders around, he could finally be himself for a while. His arrogant and somewhat arrogant side was revealed. The 3 consecutive kicks were the strengthening board of the chain kick. It allowed one to kick 3 times consecutively in an extremely short period of time to achieve the goal of injuring others. This was learned from Wang Yong, who was extremely good at leg techniques. With the existence of the qi, not only was he better at using it than Wang Yong, but the power was also amplified. Pooh! Li Min spat out a mouthful of blood from his mouth, along with 2 teeth. He slowly stood up from the ground. A very obvious footprint was imprinted on Li Min's face, making him look very miserable. Very good, it turns out that we have all underestimated you. Not only did Li Min have such thoughts, Shen Kuan also had the same thoughts. How could someone who could casually kick 3 consecutive kicks be easy to bully? However, he was very curious. When did this person learn martial arts? Ever since Yang Chendong appeared in the capital of Baiming and did a series of big things, everything related to him had been thoroughly investigated by the Imperial Secret Service and the East Faction Guards. However, no matter how he looked at it, this person did not have the time to learn martial arts. It was precisely because the information provided was too comprehensive that they never thought that Yang Chendong knew martial arts. Of course, this was also the result of Baiming not communicating with the Southern Ming Empire. Otherwise, if you asked Guanning and the other generals of the Southern Ming Empire, they would immediately give you a clear attitude. Although the fact that Yang Chendong knew martial arts was somewhat out of Shen Kuan's expectations, he immediately understood everything. He could not help but coldly say, "So that's how it is. The reason why you dared to wait for us here alone is because of your martial arts?" Bingo, your answer is correct. It seems that you are not stupid. However, don't your superiors know that if you fail to assassinate me, would Baiming be able to withstand my anger? Yang Chendong gave Shen Kuan a "you are considered smart" expression, then asked a question that the other party could not answer. Humph. Since he could not answer, Shen Kuan naturally did not need to answer. He just snorted coldly and looked at Li Min. Originally, his identity was confidential. Even if they wanted to investigate, they would not be able to find any relationship between him and Baiming. However, it was all Li Min's fault. He was too arrogant and exposed his identity. If they could not kill Yang Chendong today, the next unlucky one would be the Southern Ming Empire. Don't look at me like that. Today, he will definitely die here. Li Min naturally understood Shen Kuan's intention, but he did not care. He had always been the type to not give up until he achieved his goal. At the same time, he was also a person who would do anything to achieve his goal. Therefore, he had made sufficient preparations. If he did not succeed, he would die for a righteous cause. Li Min said decisively and was even more absolute. This also increased Shen Kuan's desire to silence him. He nodded, "Okay, in that case, the 2 of us will work together to kill him." Okay. This time, Li Min did not refuse arrogantly. Firstly, there was not much time left for them. Secondly, Yang Chendong had shown a certain level of strength, which was worthy of his attention. See, I told you. The 2 of you should have come together long ago. Otherwise, I'm afraid you won't have time to show off. My men are coming back. Yang Chendong was not the slightest bit afraid of the 2 of them working together. On the contrary, he was full of fighting spirit. In the past, when he fought with the guards, he had to leave some leeway and could only give them some minor injuries. How could it be more satisfying than a life-and-death battle now? You will regret it. Seeing Yang Chendong so confident, Li Min's eyes flashed with anger. Then, his figure suddenly rushed forward and the big sword in his hand was swung halfway. On the other side, Shen Kun also drew a flower with his long sword and passed it to Yang Chendong from the other side. What was different from before was that he also had a sword in his left hand. Now he was using two swords at the same time. Come on. Yang Chendong didn't show the slightest trace of fear even though he was fighting against two experts by himself. On the contrary, with a loud shout, a military knife appeared in his hand, and he faced the sword and saber head-on. Ding dang dang, ding dang dang, in a very short period of time, the three of them continuously exchanged more than a dozen moves. After that, they separated again and stood in a triangle. Although it was only a dozen moves, Li Min was a little out of breath. In a fight between masters, the slightest difference would often result in a head falling to the ground. Every move required countless calculations in the brain. Compared to Li Min, Shen Kun's strength was slightly weaker. Hence, his breathing was even more violent. After he stopped, he actually took 3 deep breaths before his complexion once again returned to its ruddy state. Moreover, when he looked at Yang Chendong, his gaze was a little more cautious. Among the three of them, Yang Chendong performed the best. As long as he had the time, he would train with the warriors and constantly increase his own strength. This short exchange of blows did not make him feel anything. It was because he did not feel anything that he looked at Li Min and Shen Kun with some displeasure. What? Didn't you eat when you came? You want to kill me with these moves? I think you should go back and drink milk from your mother first. Impudent. Hearing Yang Chendong humiliating him like this, Li Min roared and stepped forward again. The strength of the big sword in his hand increased a little, so that when he swung the sword, there was a heavy chi. Li Min was an orphan. He did not know what his mother looked like. Therefore, people who knew him would never mention anything about his parents in front of him. Yang Chendong said it, which naturally made him angry. At this moment, he released all his strength through his arm. Ding, ding dang. After just one hit, Yang Chendong felt the military knife in his arm sink. He had to take 2 steps back to avoid the sharp edge and at the same time, completely dispersing the force. Not bad, this is a little interesting. Knowing that Li Min was using all his strength, Yang Chendong said as he mobilized the chi in his body. Suddenly, his whole body's momentum rose. Once again, Yang Chendong took the initiative to attack. The military knife in his hand was used as a big sword to meet the big sword in Li Min's hand. Ding 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 ding, using brute force against brute force, the two of them clashed dozens of times in a very short period of time. Finally, Li Min took 5 or 6 steps back and stopped the fight. Fortunately, the quality of the weapons on both sides was quite good. Otherwise, the steel saber would have been broken before the strength was exhausted from the collision. Chapter 583. Li Min's face was pale as he retreated. Just a moment ago, he felt that his right arm was swollen. Now, when he tried to lift it, he felt extremely sore. For a long time, he had boasted that he was the strongest and had never met an opponent. But now, the facts had told him that there was always someone stronger than him, and the person who was stronger than him was Yang Chendong. I'll do it. Shen Kun naturally saw that Li Min had suffered internal injuries. As an ally, he had to do his best. With a loud shout, the long sword in his hand flew towards Yang Chendong like a snake flicking its tongue. When he leaped up, the flying swords in his hands flew out. Then, he drew his sword and threw it again. In the blink of an eye, 12 of the 13 swords flew out. The sword net was like a swarm of bees. Yang Chendong first stared at the 12 sword winds seriously. When the sword tips were about to land in front of him, he suddenly thrust the military knife in his hand forward and pointed it straight at the swords. You're courting death. Seeing that Yang Chendong actually pointed casually in the midst of the swords, a cold killing intent flashed across Shen Kun's face. This was his famous unique skill, the 100 sword fingers. 12 swords formed a net of sword attacks. Even when he faced Li Min before, she could only retreat to avoid the attack. However, when it was Yang Chendong, he did not dodge at all. Wasn't that just courting death? At this moment, Shen Kun seemed to see Yang Chendong being pierced full of holes by the sword net. At that time, he would return to Baiming with the identity of having successfully assassinated Yang Chendong. If he wasn't a hero, then what was he? From then on, his Shen family's reputation would be glorified because of him. At that time, it was not impossible for him to have a wife and a son. With a smile on his face, he seemed to have seen a beautiful future. However, his body suddenly stopped moving forward. He intuitively felt that the tip of the sword seemed to be blocked. He looked at the sword, and what he saw made him turn pale with fright. His whole body trembled. The tip of the sword was perfectly blocked by the tip of the stiletto. It was as if the two weapons were connected together, and no one could see any gap between them. Shen Kun was really frightened. The other party had not only dodged the attacks of the 12 flying swords with a casual wave of his hand, but he was also able to locate the body of his last sword. He was even able to hit the tip of the sword and successfully block it. What kind of speed did this require? What kind of eyesight? What kind of power? Shen Kun was still shocked. This was something that even Li Min couldn't do. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. He saw his opponent's stiletto circling around in the air, and his sword seemed to be attracted to it as it circled around as well. After a dozen or so rounds, a huge force came and separated the two weapons. At this moment, Shen Kun's arm had been twisted like a fried dough twist. Not to mention that his clothes were torn, even the bones in his arm were exposed. The white bones piercing out of his flesh were very obvious. Ah! The miserable state of his arm made Shen Kun involuntarily cry out. He was frightened and in pain. What a ruthless move! Li Min at the side had already adjusted his breathing. The pain in his arm was not as unbearable as before, but when he saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel his whole body go numb. They were humans, not gods. No one would be able to withstand this kind of pain. Not to mention, his right arm was completely crippled. For a swordsman, this was equivalent to having no future. Am I ruthless? Compared to you wanting to take my life, I am already very merciful. Yang Chendong looked at Li Min with a smile, but no matter how one looked at it, there was a murderous aura in that smile. Since Yang Chendong was able to break the 100-finger sword in one move, if he wanted to kill Shen Kun, it wouldn't be easy, but it definitely wouldn't be too difficult. However, he only crippled one of Shen Kun's arms. No matter how one looked at it, it was considered merciful. Don't think that you are really powerful and invincible. I don't believe that no matter how powerful you are, you can't be more powerful than explosives. He seemed to know that he was no match for Yang Chendong in terms of strength. At least, it wouldn't be easy for him to kill Shen Kun. Moreover, the scene of the knife versus the military knife just now had already shown him the true strength of Yang Chendong. Since he couldn't win in terms of strength, he would use his ultimate move. This was also Li Min's trump card. As soon as Li Min's voice fell, he tore open the night-traveling clothes in front of him, revealing his chest that was covered in explosives. The explosives were prepared by Fan Yuhai, and Li Min had agreed to it. What he pursued was to succeed or die trying. If he couldn't kill Yang Chendong, then he would just perish together with him. The explosives on his body might not be as powerful as the ones in the warehouse or the military factory, but if they were ignited, it should be no problem to blow up the command center. Yang Chendong's body trembled, then he shook his head and said slowly, "In order to kill me, you really put in a lot of effort. How is it? Do you know fear now?" After revealing his trump card, Li Min's face became ferocious, and at this moment, he also became crazy, as if he was already a winner. "Not bad, it looks very powerful, but in this way, aren't you going to die? Your adoptive father won't be able to restore his country. Is this also your goal?" Okay, you don't have to persuade me. Let me tell you, no matter what you say, this time I will definitely die. As for the restoration of the country, as long as you die, General Fan will definitely find a way to save my godfather. Then, who can stop them? At this time, Li Min was completely a lunatic. She laughed wildly, not showing the slightest bit of fear because she was about to die. After listening to Li Min's words, Yang Chendong nodded thoughtfully. Sure enough, your backer is Fan Yuhai. Not bad, no matter what, I know who wants to kill me. Since that's the case, then come, let's see if you can really blow me up. Shen Kun was sent by Baiming, so it was needless to say who his backer was. As for Li Min, was this his own action, or was there someone supporting him behind the scenes? Now that he had brought up the name of General Fan, the problem was naturally clear. Since the details of both of them were clear, it was time to end the battle. Although this kind of close combat for Yang Chendong could better use his qi and improve his combat power. But since he had a large warehouse in his hand, why would he stupidly use a cold weapon to fight? This was exactly what a wise person would do, playing up one's shortcomings and avoiding one's strengths. Facing Li Min, who was tied with explosives, Yang Chendong's expression was calm, and if one looked carefully, there was even a trace of disdain. After Li Min saw this, it made him even angrier. Although he was an orphan, no matter what he did since he was young, he always strived to be the best. No matter what he did, he could always gain the respect of others. But now, he was being looked down upon. What, do you really think I don't dare to detonate the explosives and die with you? Provoked, Li Min laughed maniacally, and then his eyes revealed a crazed look. He pulled the fuse on his body with his arm. Sizzle, green smoke rose, indicating that the gunpowder had been ignited and was about to explode. Ha ha ha, bold and loyal, so what? You're going to die here, just like a nobody like me. When the time comes, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, what's the difference between us? Li Min, who seemed to have entered a crazed state, laughed maniacally, as if he had gotten what he wanted. As long as he could kill Yang Chendong, Fan Yuhai would have a lot more opportunities, and there would be hope for his godfather to restore Jiaoji. In this way, his death was completely worth it. You're crazy. Shen Kun, who was half kneeling on the ground, pointed at Li Min with his left hand, his mouth agape. He did not know if his cold sweat was caused by fear, or by the pain caused by Yang Chendong's heavy injury. In order to achieve your goal, you'll do anything. You do have the potential to be a hero. Unfortunately, you've chosen me as your opponent, so you're destined to get nothing, only death. Facing Li Min, whose fuse was getting shorter and shorter, Yang Chendong evaluated him as a winner. Then, a mysterious smile appeared on his face. Following that, he suddenly disappeared from where he stood. No matter how glib your tongue is, you're still going to. Li Min, who was about to mock Yang Chendong, suddenly realized that his opponent had disappeared. Not only that, even his aura had disappeared. He was an assassin, an ace assassin, the #1 expert in Jiaoji. He was confident that Yang Chendong did not use any tricks to hide, just like how Japanese ninjas would use the principle of light refraction to suddenly disappear. But no matter what. That kind of disappearance was only the disappearance of the body, but if one were to sense it carefully, the aura was still there. Moreover, a true expert could kill by tracking the aura. However, Yang Chendong did not even leave behind a trace of his aura. It was as if he had never appeared here in the first place. What's going on? Where is he? Seeing that the fuse was about to be lit, and the target had disappeared, Li Min felt so depressed that he was about to vomit blood. He's not a human, he's a demon, a demon. Shen Kun, who was kneeling on the ground, was also searching for Yang Chendong's aura, but he did not find anything. At this moment, he could not help but shout, as if his spirit had been completely destroyed, and he looked like a crazy demon. Boom! Time did not give the two of them a chance to speak again. The explosives were finally ignited, and then it caused a huge explosion. Although the composition of the explosives was not at its strongest state, it was not a problem to flatten the surrounding 5 to 6 meters. Thus, more than half of the command center was destroyed by the impact of the explosives. At the same time, the two high-level assassins, Li Min and Shen Kun, were also destroyed. Chapter 584. Young Master. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were fighting with the killers outside the headquarters, looked back in shock. Looking at the headquarters that had been mostly destroyed and the loud rumbling in their ears, their eyes turned from black to white and then to red. They had really gone crazy. The young master was like a god in their eyes. The young master was the guiding light of their life, and the young master was their soul. But now that their souls were gone, how could they continue to live? Kill. At this moment, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei burst out at the same time. Facing 4 extremely powerful killers, they all showed their most violent side, and their strength had more than doubled in a short period of time. Speaking of which, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's foundation was not very good. They were not the kind of people who had practiced martial arts since they were young, nor were they martial arts geniuses. Their strength gradually increased because they followed Yang Chendong and were taken care of by him. It's just that this kind of strength was naturally no problem for them to deal with ordinary people, but once they encountered a powerful killer, they seemed a little powerless. This was also the reason why after fighting for a long time, they still couldn't deal with the enemy in front of them even though they knew that the young master might be in danger. But now it was different. The sound of the explosion was a little too wild. Worried about the safety of the 6th young master, the two burst out, breaking through their own potential and increasing their combat power. If all of this was used on ordinary people, it should be said that they were anxious. When people are anxious, they will have no scruples and their lethality will increase a lot. Originally, they were evenly matched, but now they suddenly burst out, and it was the kind of attack that only killed the enemy and did not defend. Soon, the 8 killers that the two were facing fell straight to the ground and died. Of course, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei also had a few more wounds on their bodies. However, the two of them completely ignored it and rushed straight to the command center not far behind them. They wanted to find Yang Chendong. They firmly believed that the young master would be fine. Of course, Yang Chendong would be fine. At the last moment, he entered the big warehouse. It was also the first time he had thought about it. Not only did the warehouse contain hundreds of years of advanced weapons and knowledge, it was also a safe haven. No matter how chaotic the outside world was, this place was as peaceful as ever. After the aftermath of the explosion, Yang Chendong walked out of the big warehouse. He touched the light-colored pentagram on his arm and couldn't help but feel a myriad of emotions. What kind of fortuitous encounter did he get to own Datsang? With such a good thing in his hands, shouldn't he do something? Otherwise, wouldn't he be letting down this pentagram and Datsang's love for him? Young master, young master. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's voices kept ringing. Yang Chendong suppressed the matter of Datsang in the bottom of his heart and walked out with a smile. What are you shouting for? Young master is fine. Look at you, it's better for men not to cry. It doesn't look good. That's right, at this moment, Hu Mang and Second Yang had snot and tears running down their faces. For a grown man to cry like this, it was indeed unsightly. When the two saw that Yang Chendong was fine, they couldn't help but rush over in surprise. They touched the 6th young master's body here and there, as if they were afraid that something was missing. Okay, I'm fine. I hid too far away just now. The explosion didn't hurt us, but the command center, oh, and the sand table was blown away. What a pity. Pfft, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei almost spat out their saliva. At this time, he was still thinking about the loss of the sand table. Their young master was really careless. What a weirdo. Li Min and Shen Kun were dead, and not even their bones were left. After dealing with these two experts, it didn't take long for the first and second guard teams to withdraw. They loyally completed Yang Chendong's arrangement and chased all the way out, killing all the black-clothed assassins they saw. But when they returned to the camp, they couldn't help but blame themselves. The command center was blown up. Fortunately, the sixth young master was fine. Otherwise, they would have to apologize with their lives. Even if Yang Chendong was fine, the two captains, Qiu Vi and Dao Shao, still came to apologize. In this regard, Yang Chendong did criticize them. See, there will always be someone stronger than you. Your abilities are still lacking. If it weren't for the young master, my strength is not bad, wouldn't it be dangerous this time? Just you wait. When this is over, you will train hard for me. When the time comes, whoever complains about being tired will have to leave the guard team and serve in the cold front. In the face of Yang Chendong's reprimand, the two captains obeyed and didn't talk back. They knew that the young master was doing this for their own good. After today's incident, they also decided to train harder. In the future, they must not let today's dangerous incident happen again. Below Sangnu City, the mercenaries were cleaning up the battlefield and surrounding the place. After a night of charging and fighting, the Lancang soldiers were defeated. Of the 50,000 Lancang soldiers, 45,000 Fan Yuhai soldiers escaped with Sang Wenla. Less than 10,000 of them escaped into the city. The rest were either killed or captured. Also captured were the 100,000 laborers of Lancang, as well as 20,000 Han civilians and countless military supplies. The harvest from this battle was bountiful. This battle also showed the might of the mercenaries, which could be seen from the morale of the soldiers. When Yang Chendong arrived outside the city, he saw the tired but energetic soldiers. Good. Everyone fought well in this battle. Someone will calculate the military merits later. As for now, everyone should have a good night's rest. We will attack the city tomorrow morning. Yang Chendong's affirmative attitude made all the soldiers who participated in the battle excited and happy. Some of them were already thinking about how to perform well in the battle tomorrow. On the contrary, in Sangnu City, General Sang Wenla was dispirited. He originally thought that he had found the weakness of the mercenaries and saw the hope of victory. But who would have thought that everything would be reversed at night? Not only was the army heavily damaged, they could only wait in the city to be attacked. Tell the brothers to defend the city. We must be confident. In a few days, the king will send reinforcements. At that time, it will be time for us to counterattack. These words also attracted the approval of some of the captains and Kiliarchs. It seemed that the morale of the soldiers had also increased. Only Sang Wenla knew that the Lancang kingdom did not have any reinforcements. In the Battle of Wuha Forest, General Lati died and they lost 100,000 soldiers. In the Battle of Hanoi City, General Saishi died and they lost 60,000 to 70,000 soldiers. Last night, they lost another battle and they lost nearly 100,000 soldiers. After consecutive defeats, the military strength of the Lancang kingdom had long been depleted. The 60,000 soldiers in his hands were the main force of the entire army. However, this main force was still surrounded by people, as if they would be eaten up at any time. These mercenaries were too scary. In the midst of trembling, the night finally passed. At dawn the next day, the mercenaries outside Sangnu City gathered and stood quietly outside the city, waiting for the sixth young master to give them the order to attack. Yang Chendong also changed into the golden marshal's uniform and walked over to a high ground outside the city. Victory in war was the result of the joint efforts of the generals and soldiers. In Yang Chendong's view, the strength of an army could be reflected from its external performance. It was roughly divided into 4 classes. The 4th class was a motley crew. They had no military discipline and robbed everywhere without a goal. Such an army would scatter as soon as they were attacked by an organized army. They were definitely not strong. The third-class army had a complete organizational structure. Their military formation was neat and uniform, but their fighting spirit was not high. Although they were stronger than the fourth-class army, as long as they encountered an enemy with more fighting strength, they would definitely be defeated. They could not be considered strong in this aspect. Second-class armies not only had a unified command system, but they were also well equipped. Their morale was also high. During the march, they would often shout slogans like, "Kill the enemy and serve the country." The soldiers were extremely brave. This class of army had momentum. They were not afraid of any enemy and could be called a powerful army. However, it was a pity that they were not the strongest. Compared to the strongest army, they still lacked a certain quality. This quality was silence. The strongest army was a silent army. This silence did not mean that the people in the army were mutes or did not speak. The so-called silence referred to a kind of momentum. Although there were tens of thousands of people, there was only one voice, one order, one goal, one step, one decision. In the end, to accomplish something, it would explode with unimaginable power. Leng Feng was the representative of the power of silence. When they moved, they were like thunder, shocking the world. When they were still, they were like statues, motionless and steady. With such an army and the powerful firearms provided by Dachang, there was no reason for them to lose or not win. At this moment, outside Mulberry Rage City, a dense mass of soldiers stood in the valley. They had different appearances, different military ranks, came from different places, and had different preferences, but they were all gathered in the same place, listening to the same voice, looking in the same direction. Not a single sparrow could be heard. This was the true meaning of silence, the most important quality of an army. This was a first-rate army. Such an army was invincible and invincible. In comparison, the army led by Sang Weng-la could not even be considered a second-class army. It was only a third-class army. Coupled with the defeat, the morale of the army had plummeted. There was no longer any possibility of stopping their advance. "I order," Yang Chendong's heroic voice shouted, "Attack!" Chapter 585. Boom boom boom. As soon as he finished speaking, the 100mm mortars roared angrily. The shells flew out from the barrels and drew a beautiful arc in the sky as they blasted towards Sangnu City. At the same time, 5 rocket launchers whizzed towards the East City Gate. The seemingly sturdy East City Gate was instantly destroyed, revealing the figures of the Lancang soldiers guarding behind the gate. Charge! The 2 regiments of the Cold Vanguard, the 20 battalions of the auxiliary troops, and the 30,000 Vietnamese mercenaries roared out in unison. Under the earth-shattering artillery barrage, countless brave soldiers charged forward, their momentum shaking the heavens, and no one could stop them. With a plop, he fell onto the city tower. Sang Weng-la's eyes were filled with despair. It's over, it's all over, even the general had lost his confidence in victory. The soldiers below were even more intimidated by this momentum. The only thing they could do was to run around like headless flies and throw the weapons in their hands to the ground and surrender. The Lancang kingdom had already used up all their strength in the Battle of Hanoi City. They had used all the fireproof guns and iron shields that they hurriedly produced. Although they had caused quite a bit of damage to the mercenaries, they had still lost in the end. It was also from that moment onwards that this kingdom was destined to walk down the path of defeat. The East City Gate was breached and countless mercenaries rushed into the city. What made them depressed was that they could not even put up a decent resistance. The city had changed hands and they had won. In the end, the enemy's general, Sang Weng-la, who was surrounded on the East City Tower, had no choice but to surrender with his subordinates. At this time, who would dare to resist the mercenaries? 6th Young Master, Sangnu City has been conquered. Sang Weng-la has surrendered and been captured. In the afternoon, the two regimental commanders of Lingfeng came to Yangchendong to report the results of the battle. A city guarded by 60,000 soldiers only lasted for a few hours before it was breached and wiped out. It was not slow at all. Very good. The 2nd Regiment will stay behind to clean up the battlefield and tally the spoils. The 3rd Regiment will head towards Wanxiang City. Yang Chendong nodded his head in satisfaction. With the surrender and destruction of the Sangwala tribe, the entrance to the Lansang kingdom was wide open. It was time to go straight to the center of the army. The bicycles were all transferred to the 3rd Regiment. Wu Sheng led the regiment of Cold Front straight to Wanxiang City with a face full of excitement. They would definitely create another glorious era. At this moment, Wanxiang City had yet to receive news of their defeat at the front line. As the capital of the country, it was still bustling with life, giving people the feeling that it was in a flourishing age. Any smart person would be able to feel a shadow looming over them under this flourishing age. It was like a huge beast that could devour people, opening its terrifying mouth at any time. In fact, the person who caused this shadow to appear was the representative of the civil officials, Imperial Preceptor Long Qi. After receiving the 2 million taels of silver from Yunk, Long Qi was already prepared to become a big merchant and live a comfortable life for the rest of his life. Right now, there was only one thing on his mind, which was to destroy the Lansang kingdom's regime. Only in this way could he become a rich man. If you wanted to do great things, you would always need help. After careful consideration, Long Qi's gaze landed on a person called He Guang. He Guang, the vice-captain of the Lansang kingdom's royal guards, was a rather capable general. It was because of his impressive abilities that he was not tolerated by others. This attracted the suppression of the captain of the royal guards, Mo De. And this suppression lasted for 10 years. Mo De only relied on the fact that he had an elder sister who was the king's favorite concubine. Relying on this nepotism, he had always been arrogant. Sometimes, he even dared to offend the imperial preceptor, Long Qi, and nothing happened to him. Perhaps it was because Mo De had enemies everywhere that his ability to not unite with the other officials was valued by King Paiyasai. After all, as a force to protect his safety, he could not be used by others. Mo De was incomparably arrogant. Working under such a person, he naturally did things carefully. But this was not enough. As the saying goes, if you want to condemn someone, you can always find a reason to do so. In order to prevent others from deliberately making things difficult for him, these subordinates also needed to find some backing. Coincidentally, the person He Guang found was Imperial Preceptor Long Qi. However, this did not mean that He Guang would rely on Long Qi. As the vice-captain, he still had a lot of autonomy. It was just that the relationship between the two sides was very good, and they could help each other on many things. In this kind of environment, it was normal for Long Qi to set his goal on persuading He Guang. After discussing with Yunk, Long Qi was prepared to give it a try. This was why he invited He Guang to his residence with the excuse of inviting him to a banquet. The scale of the banquet was very small. When the tall and valiant He Guang entered the banquet hall, he only saw Imperial Preceptor Long Qi and a stranger. There was not even a servant to serve them. "Ha ha ha, Captain, he is here. Please take a seat, we're just waiting for you." After seeing He Guang appear, Long Qi laughed loudly and stood up, inviting him to sit down. Skylark, on the other hand, remained seated without the slightest intention of getting up. This attracted He Guang's attention and made him ponder deeply. This person was so unfamiliar. What kind of identity did he have to be so arrogant? It seemed like he did not even give face to the Imperial Preceptor. Looking at Long Qi, he did not seem angry at all. This was a little strange. He Guang had been the vice-captain of the king's guards for so many years, and he was used to enduring. Therefore, when he looked at Yunk sitting there, he only nodded politely as a greeting. Then, he sat down on the prepared chair. After the three of them sat down, Long Qi smiled at He Guang. "General He, the war at the front is going well. What are your thoughts on the battle at Sangnu City?" The hottest topic among the upper echelons of the Lan Xang kingdom was the war at the front. Even the commoners on the streets could talk about it. As the vice-captain of the royal guards, how could He Guang not know? Therefore, after thinking for a while, he said, "There is General Sang Wang La at the front, and there is also the help of Jiaoxi's famous General Fan Yuhai. With His Majesty's full support, victory is just around the corner." He Guang said these words very smoothly, as if he had said these words countless times. Hearing this, Long Qi just smiled. Suddenly, his face became very serious as he asked, "Is this really what the general is thinking?" He Guang did not know why Long Qi would ask such a question. Puzzled, he asked, "But what does the imperial preceptor mean?" "Nothing much. I just want to hear the general's thoughts. Speaking of which, there are no outsiders here. Why don't the general be more sincere and say what you want to say?" Long Qi said like a big bad wolf leading a little rabbit to his bowl. "No outsiders, my ass. Not to mention others, just the person sitting at the side, he did not even know his name. How could he not be considered an outsider?" Of course, these were all thoughts in He Guang's heart. He could not say it out loud. Therefore, he laughed and said, "But what does the imperial preceptor think about this?" Long Qi seemed to have known that He Guang would ask this question. He said with a serious face, "Our army will lose." "Oh. What?" He Guang originally thought that the other party would say some high-sounding words like he did, but he did not expect such an answer. This was completely out of his expectations, and it also made He Guang stunned on the spot. His mouth was wide open, and it seemed like it was more than enough to stuff an egg into it. "What? General He, did you not hear me clearly? The imperial preceptor said that our army will lose. It won't be long before the news of our defeat reaches the capital. I'm afraid that at that time, the Lansang kingdom will not be safe." Long Qi had a compassionate look on his face, as though he was an eminent monk who had attained the Tao. How is this possible? He Guang was really shocked. Although he was the vice-captain of the king's captain and knew the combat power of his own soldiers, they had the advantage in numbers. In addition, they had prepared for a long time. How could they lose so easily? Even if they lost 1 or 2 battles, it would not easily affect the safety of the capital. Also, Long Qi was the imperial preceptor. How could he say something like this that boosted the morale of others and destroyed his own prestige? He Guang could not understand this. Knowing that He Guang wouldn't believe him, Long Qi smiled again. Then, he pointed to Yunk, who was sitting there and drinking tea, and said, "Come, General He, let me introduce you. This is Special Envoy Yuan sent by the Great Ming Dynasty's Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Great Ming Duke of Loyalty and Courage? Mercenary? As if he thought that he did not hear clearly, He Guang looked at Yunk and asked with a face full of doubt. At the same time, his expression was constantly changing. "Yes, this special envoy greets General He." Yun Ke finally opened his mouth to speak. He spoke the standard language of the Great Ming Dynasty. But, it sounded like a thunderclap in He Guang's mind. What was going on? He actually saw the enemy's special envoy in the imperial preceptor's residence. This person did not go to the palace but appeared here. Could it be that he secretly came to contact the imperial preceptor? What did the imperial preceptor want to do? Betray the country? Thinking of this, He Guang suddenly stood up from the chair and pulled out the sword on his body. Imperial preceptor, this person appeared here without His Majesty's permission. He must be an enemy spy. Please allow me to take him down. Take him down? Take him to who? Whether it was Long Qi or Skylark, they didn't seem to care about He Guang's intense reaction. It was as if they didn't see the angry atmosphere and just sat there calmly. Of course it's to His Majesty. He Guang naturally replied. What happens after you hand it to His Majesty? Are you going to hand me over to His Majesty for punishment? As he spoke, Long Qi's face became gloomy. In the end, he was the imperial preceptor of a country. Once he was angry, he would be imposing without being angry. At this moment, He Guang was also intimidated by this imposing manner. Then, he suddenly remembered that this was the imperial preceptor's residence. Since Special Envoy Yuan could sit there calmly and unhurriedly, it was clear that he had obtained the imperial preceptor's approval. Then, why would he capture someone here? This time, He Guang came alone and did not bring a single subordinate. If the other party turned hostile, would he be able to walk out of the imperial preceptor's residence? Sigh, once the front line is defeated, what will His Majesty decide? I'm sure he'll use the power of the king's guards to counterattack. Who do you think is the leader of this group? It couldn't be that idiot Mo himself, right? His Majesty probably wouldn't allow that. But when a general leads an army, can you guarantee victory? The hundreds of thousands of people in front of you are no match for the mercenaries. What can you do with the few people in your hands? If this isn't a great disaster, then what is? This. He Guang really wanted to deny all of this, but he knew that what the state preceptor said was true. Mo's ability was limited, and His Majesty knew this as well. However, considering that this person was still very obedient, it was naturally not bad to raise him as a loyal dog. However, such a dog could not be released to bite people, because he did not have the ability to do so. At that time, it would be inevitable for him, the vice-captain, to lead the army. To lead the army was naturally something that every general hoped to do. However, just as the state preceptor said, the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in front of him were no match for the mercenaries. How many men could he bring out? The entire king's guards only had 20,000 people, how could they defeat the mercenaries? If that wasn't courting death, then what was? However, at that time, he would have to do so regardless of whether he was willing or not. If he agreed, he would die on the battlefield. If he didn't agree, he would very likely be taken down by Mo. No matter what the outcome was, there wouldn't be a good ending. Layers of cold sweat began to flow out of He Guang's head. Previously, he didn't think that the army in front of him would be defeated, so he didn't consider these things. But now that it was pointed out, he realized that the situation was already so dangerous. Of course, the so-called danger would only appear when the army in front of him was completely defeated. If they didn't lose, if it was only a small defeat, then all of what the state preceptor said wouldn't happen, and he wouldn't be in danger. He Guang was still deep in thought when Skylark, who was sitting there playing with a pistol in his hand, spoke. General He, after the state preceptor's recommendation, we found that you are indeed a character. Therefore, the Duke of Loyalty said that if you are willing to surrender, he will use you heavily. You know General Hong Jin of Yunnan Province, which is the original Jianghu country, right? In the past, he was just a deputy general with a low status. However, he was chosen by the Duke of Loyalty and has become the current general of Yunnan Province, leading 30,000 soldiers. If General He is willing, the future General Lan Tsang will be you, and you can also lead 30,000 soldiers. This way, you won't have to die, and you can also become a real general. Isn't that beautiful? He Guang knew about Hong Jin's matter. Although some people were afraid that he was a traitor, who knew how many people envied him in private. At least because of this person, the Hong family didn't suffer heavy losses. Not only that, but Hong Jin's status also rose. It was said that the Duke of Loyalty gave him an annual salary of 100,000 taels of silver. Who knew how many people envied him? It should be explained here that Yang Chendong implemented a high salary policy to raise honest people. Once someone was appointed, they would enjoy a high annual salary. It was to ensure that the person appointed could live a good life, or at least not have to worry about living. Moreover, once they reached a certain age and needed to retire, they would receive a large monthly salary, which was called a pension. This kind of treatment would only end when the person who was enjoying it died. In other words, once someone was appointed as an official by the Duke of Loyalty, they wouldn't have to worry about food and drink for the rest of their life. Of course, if someone was still dissatisfied and wanted to be corrupt, then sorry, once it was found out, the punishment would be quite severe. There were already clear rules that anyone who was found to be corrupt over 10,000 taels of silver would be killed without mercy. No matter what kind of achievements they had in the past, the result would be the same. The Duke of Loyalty said that merits couldn't offset demerits. After all, they didn't have to worry about food and drink, and even arranged for their old age. If they were still dissatisfied, then they deserved to be killed. Back to the main topic, He Guang was one of the people who envied Hong Jin in private. Not only did he envy Hong Jin's ability to lead troops and become a true general, but he also envied Hong Jin's treatment. For example, he was the vice-captain of the king's guards and could be considered a fourth-ranked general. However, in reality, his monthly salary was only 80 taels of silver, which was less than 1,000 taels of silver a year. Although it wasn't a problem to support a family, it was just a casual life. He didn't have the ability to do anything else, and even if he wanted to be more comfortable, he couldn't do it. Now that his role model was in front of him, and his treatment was 100 times better than his own, and his power was also much greater. At this moment, it was impossible to say that he wasn't moved at all. Although he wasn't a greedy person, or else Yuan wouldn't have talked to him in this way, who would refuse a better life? At this moment, He Guang became a lot more silent and had a hesitant appearance. General, he doesn't need to answer so early. How about this, you can go back first and think about it carefully. If the front lines are really defeated and you are sent out as a general, then it won't be too late to make a decision at that time. Yuan didn't seem to be in a hurry to force He Guang to answer, and instead said very generously, "Let me go." He Guang was also shocked at this moment. He didn't agree to anything, and on the contrary, he knew about Yuan's existence. Wasn't the other party afraid that he would sell him out and come back with troops to capture him? As if he saw through He Guang's thoughts, Yuan laughed and said, "General, he is a smart person, how can you do something stupid? Besides, even if you really hand me over to your king, what benefits will you get? There is still Maud above you, so you won't be able to stand out. On the other hand, if you sell me out, will the loyal guild forgive you? You have to know that we have a lot of these guns in the mercenary army. If we casually use one on someone, I guarantee that you will be completely dead, and no one will even know who did it." After tempting and threatening, Yuan waved his hand. "Okay, General, he can leave." I'm really leaving." Slowly standing up, He Guang decided to leave first. There were some things that he needed to think about carefully. Standing up, He Guang prepared to leave with large strides, but Yuan's voice suddenly sounded behind him, "Wait." Sure enough, he still isn't going to let me go? He Guang sighed and slowly turned around. "Take your sword with you. Also, don't look like you have lost your soul. Anyone who sees you will have doubts." Yuan pointed at the sword on the ground and said very casually, "Oh." He Guang's heart that had been raised up finally calmed down. He picked up the sword and bowed, then turned around and left. He Guang really left, leaving behind state teacher Long Qi, who asked with lingering fear, "Special Envoy Yuan, he really won't tell on us? Why don't we leave now?" State teacher, don't worry. As long as he isn't stupid, he won't tell on us. There is no need for us to leave. Does state teacher really think that I am the only one who came to Wanxiang City?" Yuan laughed very confidently. Chapter 587. The more confident Yuan was, the more confident Long Qi became. He chuckled when he heard what Yuan said. That's right. He wasn't even afraid of Yuan. What was there to be afraid of? If something really happened, he could just say that he was being held hostage. With his status as the state preceptor, there was still a lot of room for negotiation. As Yuan expected, He Guang was a smart person. He didn't choose to report it immediately. Instead, he decided to look at the situation first. Especially when he saw the deep mark made by the bullet on the saber, he didn't have the thought of reporting it. Just as they said, there was no benefit in reporting it. On the contrary, he would be targeted by the mercenaries and be in danger at any time. This kind of life was not what he wanted. 3 days had passed since He Guang left the state preceptor's residence. 3 days later, the latest news finally came. The front army was defeated. General Sang Wenla had no choice but to retreat to Sangnu city and ask the king for reinforcements. As soon as the news reached the capital, it was chaotic. The court was even more chaotic. All the officials looked scared, as if they were worried that Sangnu city would not be able to be defended. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that the capital would be in danger? Wouldn't it mean that the Lansang kingdom would follow in the footsteps of Jiaoji and be destroyed? It was impossible for others to say that a country would be destroyed. Even in the powerful Ming dynasty, they would only make you submit and would not occupy your territory. This was because in the eyes of the people of the Central Plains, these were all barren lands and did not have much value. However, the mercenaries were not. Their appetite was extremely good. They really did not care about meat and fish. They could really do things that could destroy a country. Under the lead of state preceptor Long Qi, all the civil officials asked the king to send troops to reinforce Sangnu city. Looking at the same scene below, King Payasai felt a headache coming on. Send troops, send troops. He also wanted to send troops, but there had to be troops to send. But now, other than the 20,000 king's guards beside him, there were no extra troops. Even if he went to recruit troops now, it would still take time. Your Majesty, please send troops quickly. No matter what, you can't let the mercenaries pass Sangnu city. Once that happens, the country will be in danger. Long Qi continued to plead on behalf of the officials. Yes, Your Majesty, please send reinforcements quickly. The civil officials below all cooperated and asked in unison. At this point, even Payasai could not stop them. Moreover, he knew that if the frontline army was defeated, his 20,000 king's guards would not be of much use. Since that was the case, it was better to support the frontline first. Then, they would recruit soldiers from all over the country. Hopefully, they would make it in time. Alright, this king will immediately send troops. Under the immense pressure, Payasai finally made a decision. Of the 20,000 king's guards, only 5,000 remained. The rest were handed over to the vice-captain, hoping that he would be able to help Sang Wang and turn the tables around. The army at the front had indeed been defeated, and he had indeed been appointed as the commander of the army. All of this was within the expectations of Special Envoy Yuan. The moment He Guang received the military order, he ordered a few of his trusted subordinates to gather the troops while he himself headed straight for the imperial tutor's residence. To the outside world, they were here to ask about the logistics, but in fact, they were here to see the special envoy. The three of them met again. Although it had only been 3 days, many things had changed. At this moment, He Guang was less arrogant and more respectful. Special Envoy Yuan, this general is willing to surrender. Please tell me what to do next. Well said, well said. Yuan smiled and reached into his pocket. This time, he did not take out a flintlock, but a bunch of banknotes. There were banknotes with denominations of 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, and 10,000. There were over 100 banknotes, which added up to 500,000. After taking out the banknotes, Yuan placed them in front of He Guang. General He, take these and bribe all the Kiliarchs, Centurions, Decharches, and Decharches. This army will be the foundation for you to establish yourself here in the future. This This is all for me. It was the first time Guang saw so many banknotes, so he looked a little excited. Sorry, there is nothing for you here. These are all for your subordinates. As for you, this is the only one. Skylark chuckled and took out another piece of paper from his bosom. Written on it was 200,000 taels of silver. Handing the banknote to Guang, Yuan said, 100,000 is the reward for you joining the Duke of Loyalty. The other 100,000 is your annual salary for the next year. Now, take it. People worked first before they were paid, but the Duke of Loyalty paid first before he worked. Speaking of which, the payment was the same, but the feeling it gave was completely different. Holding the gold and silver in his hand, Guang was really moved at this moment. With a plop, he knelt in front of Yuan. Special Envoy Yuan, thank you for your trust. Don't worry, this general will not let you down. Alright, this kneel will wait for the Duke of Loyalty to come. Skylark chuckled. With this kneel, this task could be considered completed. He believed that the sixth young master would definitely praise him. The Duke of Loyalty is coming here? Wasn't I the one who brought people to Jianghu city? Guang was puzzled and confused. Yuan and Long Qi looked at each other and smiled. However, no matter how you looked at it, Long Qi's smile was a little forced. It was not his fault. Who would have thought that the army at the front line would be defeated so miserably? When he heard the latest news from Yuan, he was shocked. While laughing, Yuan said to Guang, who had already stood up, General you still don't know, right? Jianghu city has already been breached. The Duke of Loyalty is leading the army to Wuxia city. Not only that, there is already a group of mercenaries lying in ambush outside the city. They will work together with General to solve the problem inside Wuxia city. The time is set for tonight. At that time, General will be in charge of opening the north gate. There shouldn't be any problems, right? Ah. It was indeed the first time Guang heard this news. He was really shocked. He did not expect that the moment the news of Jianghu city being besieged, the city had already been breached. What was even more unbelievable was that the mercenaries had already arrived at the city without him knowing. At this moment, his legs trembled and he almost knelt on the ground. Yuan did not take Guang's reaction to heart and continued, General only needs to control the palace and the residences of the ministers. The matter of taking down the treasury, armory, and granary will naturally be done by the mercenaries. Do you understand? Understood, this general understands. Guang, who originally had a trace of arrogance, became completely obedient at this moment. He originally thought that the other party would rely on him. Only now did he know that even if he did not make a move, Wuxia city would still be breached. It was just a matter of time. State teacher, I also need your cooperation this time. Yuan turned his head and looked at Long Qi with a smile. Long Qi reached out to stroke his beard and nodded while laughing. Well said, well said. I will hold a banquet tonight and gather all the ministers in the city. That would be great. Yuan knew that Long Qi understood his meaning and smiled reservedly. With this plan completed, all that was left was to wait for night to arrive. Half an hour later, Guang left the imperial advisor's residence. He announced to the public that he had received the full support of the imperial advisor and that the rations were no longer a problem. He then gathered all the subordinates under him for a meeting to discuss matters. At the same time, many carriages walked out of the state teacher's residence. These servants went to the various ministers' residences in the city to send out invitations. It was said that all the civil officials were gathered to contribute to the army that was about to depart. At the same time, they had to pray for the blessings of the gods. Chapter 588. Originally, some people were still half-heartedly thinking that once they were free, they would pass on the message. But now, they hesitated. Was it worth it to risk their lives for a dynasty that was about to be destroyed? There was no fame, no benefits, no benefits. It was not worth it to risk their lives for a loyalty that they did not know if the king would believe. Not to mention offending the mercenaries, no place in the world would be safe. After settling the army, Guang finally relaxed and started to plan every step of the night. The sky slowly darkened. Wanxiang City did not have a curfew, so at this time, lanterns were hung up everywhere, making it seem very lively and bustling. Especially at the imperial tutor's residence tonight, it was full of guests. Carriages arrived one after another, and the sound of greetings could be heard. Imperial tutor Long Qi was personally welcoming the guests at the door, giving them enough face, making everyone's face even more radiant. Looking at everyone, who had a face that showed concern for the country and its people. After waiting for more than 2 hours and not seeing any guests, Long Qi patted his back and said to the housekeeper behind him with a tired look, "You can close the door now. Without orders, no one is allowed to enter and no one is allowed to leave." "Master, don't worry, I know what to do." The butler nodded. This old man who had followed the imperial tutor for decades naturally knew what to do, and even knew what might happen next. The ministers were surrounded, and the army camp also started to move. The first step was to surround the 5,000 king's guards that had not been assigned to them. Fortunately, their guard captain Immortal had already gone to the imperial tutor's residence for the banquet. Without a leader, it was not very troublesome to deal with them. The second step was to surround the palace, and no one was allowed to enter or leave without orders. This was equivalent to cutting off the connection between the king and others. The third step was to open the city gates and let the mercenaries outside the city in. The first step of the plan was to surround the camp of the king's guards with 8,000 soldiers. Then, under the protection of a group of personal guards, Guang walked into the camp with the emperor's fake decree in his hand, and said that these 5,000 soldiers would also be under his leadership. Many of these 5,000 people were Immortal's trusted aides. When they saw that their master did not appear, they felt that something was wrong. Some of them were bold enough to look at the Wang Yu in Guang's hands to determine if it was true or false. "Humph, with your status, what right do you have to see Wang Yu? I think you're clearly using this opportunity to rebel. Guards! Take him down." Guang would not reason with anyone. With the military power in hand, he only needed to rely on his own strength to push through. A group of personal guards swarmed forward. Anyone who refused to comply would be killed. Blood flowed like a river. After the heads of dozens of people were separated from their bodies, the others finally became obedient and knelt on the ground in submission. With the matter of the barrack settled, the next step was to seal off the palace. There were still 500 king's guards left here. Usually, all of them had their noses in the air, and it was very difficult for them to put other people in their eyes. At this moment, when they saw that someone had actually surrounded them, which one of them wasn't anxious to the point of stomping their feet? Some of the more irritable ones even brandished their swords and rushed out, looking as if they wanted to teach the other party a lesson. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Waves of arrows flew over, and the ground was filled with corpses. This also intimidated these arrogant people. When they knew that the other party was serious, they retreated step by step until they reached the front of His Majesty's palace. Only then did they stop with nowhere to go. When the news reached his ears, Piasai was really shocked. He never thought that General Guang, whom he had taken a fancy to, would actually have thoughts of rebellion. Usually, this person looked very reliable. As the king of a country, he also had his own pride. Before the matter was finalized, he still wanted to work hard. Thus, under the protection of a few guards, he wanted to go out and see Guang. As soon as he walked out, waves of arrows rained down and stopped about 20 feet in front of them. They were not targets, but just deterred. However, this was enough. Piasai's legs went soft. If it weren't for the guards beside him supporting him, he was afraid that he would have fallen to the ground. He was also a king, but he was not like Lily, who had fought his way out of life and death situations. He had inherited the throne. When had he ever seen such a scene of shouting and killing? Quick, retreat! Retreat! Send a signal for help. Payasai did not know what the situation outside was like, but the only thing he could do now was to ask for help. Soon, a dazzling and colorful firework rose into the sky from the palace. That was the king's signal for help. The firework rose into the air, illuminating the sky and making it much brighter. The Grand Preceptor's residence, which was not far from the palace, could naturally see it clearly. When some of the officials discovered this signal, they were all shocked. The captain of the king's guards, Maud, immediately stood up and wanted to rush out of the Grand Preceptor's residence. General Maud, what do you mean by this? The Grand Preceptor's banquet is not over yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Long Qi sat on the high seat, drinking the wine in his cup as he spoke slowly. Lord Grand Preceptor, you saw it. His Majesty sent a signal for help. There must be some thieves causing trouble. I want to go back and protect him. Maud hadn't thought that this matter would have anything to do with the Grand Preceptor. After all, this was an important minister. If anything happened to the king, it wouldn't be good for him. After cupping his fists and saying all this, Maud turned around and was about to leave with his 4 personal guards. However, a dozen or so guards from the Grand Preceptor's residence appeared in front of him. They all stood with their swords and blocked Maud's path. Grand Preceptor, what are you doing? He still hadn't reacted. Instead, he asked with a puzzled expression. From this point of view, this Maud had indeed relied on his connections to get to the top. His ability to adapt was too weak. He was no different from an idiot. Without directly answering Maud's question, Long Qi only looked up at the sky, then smiled and said, "The Grand Preceptor doesn't think that's a signal for help. It must be a child's trick." What? How is that possible? This time, there was no need for Maud to say anything. The other ministers all looked at Long Qi with bewildered gazes. Anyone could tell how intense the firework explosion was. Other than the royal family, no one else could use it. Even if they had money, they couldn't buy it. However, the Grand Preceptor said that it was a child's trick. What did he mean by that? Some of the quick-witted people's expressions changed drastically. They thought to themselves, could it be that the Grand Preceptor was going to rebel? Could it be that he wanted to take the opportunity to rise to the top, or had he already joined the mercenaries? If it was the former, it would be better. No matter what, they were still ministers. Whoever became the emperor would need the help of their ministers. Just by being able to come to the Grand Preceptor's residence today, their status in the future would not be too low. But what if it was the latter? Once the mercenaries took control of this place, what else could they do? That was not changing the royal family, but changing the dynasty. A great purge was unavoidable. Could they still be as high and mighty as before? More and more people thought of what might happen, and more people looked at Long Qi with a different gaze. At this moment, Maud finally understood. He suddenly pointed his finger at Long Qi and said, You actually want to rebel? Nonsense. Which eye of yours saw the Grand Preceptor rebelling? Long Qi snorted angrily. Although he controlled the entire scene, he didn't want to cause any more trouble before the mercenaries arrived. Of course, he wouldn't admit that he was rebelling. Seeing that Long Qi was still pretending at this time, Maud was also very angry. He pointed his finger and said, "All right, if you're not rebelling, then do you dare to let this general out?" Maud had already thought it through. No matter what the Grand Preceptor's actions were, he would definitely mobilize an army to annihilate the Grand Preceptor's residence this time. In any case, this person had already walked together with Yiguang, so he was his enemy. He would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. How could this little thought be hidden from Long Qi's eyes? To be able to become the Grand Preceptor, his IQ was definitely extremely high. He chuckled, right now, this is a banquet held by the Grand Preceptor. The purpose of this banquet is to solve the various difficulties of the general at the front. Right now, we haven't even talked about the proper matters, so no one is allowed to leave. After casually finding a reason, Long Qi returned to his seat. In any case, this place was already under his control. It was impossible for Maud and his 4 personal guards to kill their way out. Come, everyone drink. Don't let such a small matter affect everyone's elegance. As he spoke, Long Qi really raised his cup to everyone. At this moment, he had no choice but to lower his head under the eaves. After a moment of hesitation, the other ministers raised their cups one after another. In their opinion, no matter what the outcome was, falling out with the Grand Preceptor now would not result in a good outcome. Didn't you see that more and more soldiers were appearing in the surroundings? Each of them held a large blade in their hands and had a fierce look on their faces. It was as if they would fight and take someone's life at the slightest disagreement. In order to stabilize these officials, he didn't want them to cause trouble. Long Qi had specially borrowed 500 soldiers from Higuang. With these 500 people, it was enough to stabilize the situation here. Maud was still angry in his heart, especially when he saw that the soldiers who appeared were actually from the king's guard. Long Qi's heart was as clear as day. However, it was precisely because of the appearance of these people that he had no choice but to cower. This was because what he saw in the eyes of these soldiers was not the reverence of seeing their general. Instead, their faces were filled with killing intent. Relying on nepotism to get to the top, it was naturally easy for Mo De to use his connections to intimidate others. He could even act out his true colors. However, if one were to talk about fighting to the death, then he did not have the guts to do so. Chapter 589. In the end, Maud obediently returned to his seat and sat down. Since even he lowered his head, the other ministers did not dare to provoke him. They all forced a smile and acted as if they did not see the changes in their surroundings. This was exactly what Long Qi wanted. He chuckled and continued to chat with everyone, but he did not mention anything about the issue of providing security for the soldiers. Fortunately, everyone could see that this was to imprison them. Since that was the case, as long as they behaved themselves, they should be able to keep their lives. At the North City Gate, the torches outside circled 3 times and the torches on the city tower circled twice before the gates opened. The 3 regiments of the Lengfeng battalion suddenly appeared like ghosts in the night and entered the city through the open city gate. With a high-speed bicycle, Wuxia brought the 3 regiments to the outskirts of Wanxiang City in the morning. They even had a chance to catch up on sleep and eat before entering the city energetically. The 3 regiments of more than 1,000 soldiers were like a silent giant dragon. Other than the sound of their orderly footsteps, there was no other movement. Just this aura alone was enough to scare many of the Lancang soldiers. As they walked, the 3 regiments divided their soldiers. For example, they left a platoon of soldiers behind at the East City Gate that they were allowed to enter. The creed of the Lengfeng battalion was that they could trust their officers and comrades, but they would not easily trust others. For places like the city gate that could be attacked or retreated, it was better to leave their own people behind to make them feel more at ease. Political Commissar Chen, I will have to trouble you to make a trip to the Grand Tutor's residence and settle the matters there. 3rd Battalion Commander, you are in charge of taking over the treasury, armory, and granary in the city. There must not be any accidents. Wuxia walked forward with large strides while giving orders to the political commissar and 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo and 3rd Battalion Commander Chang Chun. This was originally a plan that had been discussed outside the city. The 2 battalion commanders naturally agreed and nodded before starting their own operations. As the regiment commander, Wuxia led his men straight to the palace. The moment they entered the city, the agents of the security bureau rushed over to lead the way. As long as the target was pointed out, there would not be any mistakes. In the king's bedroom deep in the palace, Payasai was pacing back and forth anxiously. The distress signal had already been sent out, but until now, no one had come to protect him. Could it be that the situation had changed? Could it be that he was already alone? Reporting to your majesty, there's another group of people outside. Just as Payasai was feeling anxious, a guard walked in and knelt on the ground. Reinforcements have finally arrived? Tell everyone to get ready. Once there's a chance, we'll attack from both inside and outside. He thought that his reinforcements had finally arrived. At this moment, he was full of confidence. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. This time, Payasai was destined to be disappointed. Although there were people coming, they were not his reinforcements. They were Zheng Chang's enemy, the commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, Wu Sheng. He Guang was guarding this place. After all, this place was of great importance. After knowing that the mercenaries had finally arrived, he tidied up his uniform and went to greet them. You are He Guang? Wu Sheng walked up to a general in armor and asked in a condescending manner. Yes, I am He Guang. He did not know why, but when he saw Wu Sheng, he felt a strong sense of oppression. There was even a murderous aura coming straight at him. This was a natural result of killing too many people on the battlefield. It was not something that He Guang, who had always stayed in the palace, could compare to. You've done well. Let me introduce myself. I'm the commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, Wu Sheng. You can call me Commander Wu. Oh right, how's the situation? He continued to ask as he walked, but his eyes were observing the surroundings intentionally or unintentionally. Although the Security Bureau's intelligence said that He Guang was trustworthy, before the overall situation was settled, he should not let his guard down. When he heard that the other party was the commander of the Cold Front, He Guang immediately felt his aura weaken. In the past few days, he had learned about the mercenaries from various sources. He also knew that the Cold Front was the most powerful force among the mercenaries. Now that a commander had appeared, how could he not be nervous? Commander Wu, Your Majesty, no. Pasha is in the front yard of the palace. He still has a few hundred guards under him. Their skills and combat strength are not bad. He Guang gave a simple introduction of the situation. However, when Wu Sheng heard this, he did not think much of it. Their combat strength is not bad. Then I would like to see their strength. Come, where is the commander of the 4th Company? I'll give you 2 incense sticks time to beat them into submission. If you can't complete the mission, you're not allowed to eat meat for a week. Yes. As soon as he shouted, a loud voice answered. Then, a team of 100 people separated from the main force and approached the palace. Oh right, the 4th Company is the lowest company of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front, it's not the strongest. Wu Sheng said casually when he saw the 4th Company respond. This was a low-key show-off. However, He Guang still could not understand the meaning of this sentence. After all, the 4th Company had not shown their prowess yet. In his eyes, whether they were the strongest or not was not clear. However, it was only when the real battle began that he understood. Especially in the dark night, when he saw the flying flames and deafening gunshots. Most importantly, the scene of people falling to the ground in the depths of the palace shocked him completely. With He Guang's strength, it would not be too difficult for him to eliminate these 500 people, but it would not be so easy. How was this a battle? It was a massacre. Every time a gunshot rang out, there would always be people falling to the ground. It was as if a spell had been cast on them. It was incomparably accurate. Although it was said to take 2 incense sticks time, in just 1 incense stick's time, the king's bedroom was hung with a white flag. There was no other way. In just a short while, more than 200 people had died. They did not even see the enemy's appearance. How were they going to fight this battle? This was clearly not a battle, but a waiting for death. He Guang's face was filled with shock. He wondered what would happen if he were to be the one leading the army. Wu Sheng had said that this wasn't their strongest attack. Wu Sheng had said that this wasn't their strongest attack. He Guang's face was filled with shock. He wondered what would happen if he were the one leading the army. It seemed that no matter how he thought about it, he could not change the outcome of being slaughtered. He Guang's expression changed drastically. All of this was seen by Wu Sheng from the corner of his eyes. He could not help but laugh. He had already learned from the security bureau that this He Guang would become a general like Hong Jin. If he did not beat him up once and for all and subdue him, it was inevitable that some unexpected problems would occur in the future. Presumably, after experiencing what happened today, He Guang would have to think carefully about any thoughts he had. The white flag was hung high, and the gunshots stopped. Then, King Piasai walked out under the protection of a group of guards. Let's go. Let's welcome the surrendered king. This is not the first time we welcome a surrendered king. Of course, it won't be the last. Wu Sheng's heroic voice rang in everyone's ears. Naturally, the cold vanguard soldiers all puffed out their chests and looked proud. He Guang and the others' eyes were also shining. This was a real army, the strongest army. Now, they were on the same side. Just thinking about it made them excited. The Grand Preceptor's residence. The banquet was still going on, and it seemed to be very lively. There was no other way. They were already surrounded, and their lives were already in the hands of others. If they did not drink now, when would they? Of course, no one would be stupid enough to really get drunk. After all, to them, drinking at this time was also a kind of mission, or even an act. Ba ba ba. Ba ba ba. Suddenly, concentrated gunshots came from the streets outside the mansion. It was the sound of the 3rd Battalion attacking the treasury, the armory, and the granary. As soon as the gunshots rang out, the banquet hall naturally heard it. Some people could no longer sit still. There was no movement. He could still pretend to be an ostrich and pretend that he did not know anything. However, gunshots rang out. How could he pretend? Moda suddenly stood up. Because his movements were too big, he actually knocked the pot of wine in front of him to the ground. However, he did not feel it at all. Instead, he looked at Long Qi and said, "Lord Imperial Preceptor, are children still playing now? Oh, maybe they're the ones setting off firecrackers." Hearing the gunshots, Long Qi knew that the mercenaries had entered the city. At this moment, Long Qi's heart calmed down. When he looked at Moda, he was naturally even more fearless. You're bullshitting. Long Qi's ability to lie with his eyes wide open infuriated Moda. He could no longer hold it in and started cursing loudly. "Bastard, Moda, clean your mouth. Otherwise, I don't mind sealing your mouth." What kind of status did Long Qi have? At this moment, victory was in his grasp. How could he be afraid of the other party's threats and intimidation? You dare. Knowing that there was no way out, Moda also showed his ferocity. He did not flare up just now because he also held on to a sliver of hope. That was, without him appearing, the king would be able to solve the problem. But now, even gunshots could be heard outside. It was obvious that his hope had turned into a dream. At this moment, he had to rely on himself. Moda, who had no way out, decided to show his might and rush out. However, he definitely couldn't beat the guards outside, so he set his target on Long Qi. If he could capture this person alive, perhaps he would have a chance to escape. Protect the Imperial Preceptor. The 6 guards nearby saw that something was wrong with Moda's mood. After shouting, they drew their swords and rushed forward. At this moment, Moda also rushed over with 4 guards. In an instant, they started fighting, and the banquet became incomparably chaotic. Facing the questioning of the ministers, Long Qi had a bitter look on his face. He opened his mouth and closed it again. This time, the ministers were gathered because they didn't want them to disrupt the mercenaries' plan to enter the city and take control of the situation. As for the benefits, there really wasn't anything. Although he would receive 5 million taels of silver from the Duke of Loyalty, that was his own fault. He couldn't take it out and share it with everyone. Furthermore, 5 million taels of silver may seem like a lot, but if these people were to be divided, then how much would be left in his hands? Almost no one was willing to spit out the fat meat that was already in their mouth. Naturally, Long Qi wouldn't either. He retreated while looking at the side door behind him, wondering if he could slip away from there. After all, the mercenaries should be here soon. As long as he waited for a while, the situation would be settled. Watch him, don't let him escape. Someone saw the side door behind Long Qi and immediately shouted. Then, a few younger officials ran towards the side door, cutting off Long Qi's escape route. Seeing that his thoughts were seen through, Long Qi cursed inwardly. However, because he was older, his speed was limited. It was obviously too late for him to escape. Just as everyone was about to surround Long Qi and demand for an explanation or even openly ask for benefits, a person suddenly walked out from the side door. He was dressed in Han Chinese clothing. He wasn't very tall and looked very ordinary. However, his eyes were too bright. Anyone who saw them would have an unforgettable feeling. The person who came was the third leader of the Security Bureau's Foreign Affairs Department, Yuan Quebec. He originally didn't want to come out. After all, the fewer people who knew about his identity, the better. However, he didn't expect that the club-like mod to be so scheming. He knew to use everyone's strength to pressure Long Qi. Seeing that the state preceptor was about to be in danger, he had no choice but to stand out. Otherwise, if Long Qi died here, even if he didn't do it, it was inevitable that people would have such thoughts. This wouldn't be good for them to persuade the ministers of other countries in the future. For the future, for the sake of the overall situation, Yun Ke took the initiative to stand out. As soon as he came out, he narrowed his eyes and looked at the ministers of the Lan Tsang kingdom standing in front of him. Even though he was squinting his eyes, he still gave people a very dangerous feeling. He was like a viper hibernating in the grass, as if he would jump out and hurt people at any time. This feeling made the young courtiers involuntarily step back. What are you doing? What benefits do you want? Why don't you tell me? Since he had already walked out, Yun Ke naturally wanted to have the right to speak. Thus, as he spoke, he found the nearest chair and sat down. Then, he played with a small .77 pistol in his hand. Although Skylark had undergone special training when he entered the Security Bureau, he was not arrogant enough to think that he could fight against a group of people. After all, there were dozens of them. As the saying goes, a gentleman doesn't stand under a dangerous wall. He took out the pistol to protect himself. Of course, it could also be used to intimidate the other party. Who are you? Skylark appeared in front of everyone as if they were nothing and exuded a murderous aura. These ministers couldn't understand him, so they asked hesitantly. Originally, he thought that he was in danger, but he didn't expect Yun Ke to take the initiative to come out. While Long Qi was grateful, his expression also became complacent. You asked who he is? After knowing, don't be scared out of your wits. He is the special envoy sent by the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Special envoy? Listening to Long Qi's introduction, the ministers looked at each other. Then, everyone had a look of understanding. It seemed that the state preceptor was indeed in cahoots with the mercenaries. Just now, it was just a guess. Now, it could be confirmed. This wasn't beyond everyone's expectations. Now, everyone was more concerned about what kind of power this Mr. Special Envoy had. Could it bring them benefits? So soon, these ministers quieted down. Then, one of them asked, "So it's Mr. Special Envoy. But I don't know what kind of benefits you gave the state preceptor to make him work so hard for the Duke of Loyalty and Courage." This was originally a test. Even if Yuan didn't answer them, these people couldn't say anything. However, in order to stall for time, Yuan decided to answer this question. "Do you want to know that much? Well, then this special envoy will tell you. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage gave the state preceptor 5 million taels of silver. I don't know if this is enough." "What? 5 million taels? It's actually so much. If I were the state preceptor, I'm afraid I wouldn't refuse." Yes. If it was given to me, I'm afraid I won't be able to spend it all in my lifetime. It must be enough." Hearing Yuan answer, the ministers immediately boiled up. Some of them even completely disregarded their image and unreservedly expressed their envy for the state preceptor. There were even some who directly said that it was enough. Those people couldn't wait to be chosen by the special envoy. Everyone was talking at once. This delayed for a while. Finally, a slightly older and highly respected minister coughed lightly. "What are you all doing? Have you all forgotten your own identity?" "Ah." This reprimand immediately made many of the ministers' faces turn hot. However, this embarrassment only lasted for a moment. In front of benefits, who would retreat? What was unexpected was that the elder who reprimanded them just now suddenly changed his tone. "Mr. Special Envoy, in fact, we can also help the mercenaries. But I don't know what kind of benefits you can give us." Pfft! Hearing this, Skylark almost spat out the tea she had just drunk. He had seen shameless people before, but he had never seen such shameless people. From this point, it could be seen that the treatment of the Lanzang Kingdom's ministers wasn't good. In fact, not only the Lanzang Kingdom, but even the Jianghu Kingdom and the Great Ming Dynasty's ministers weren't treated well. Especially the Great Ming Dynasty. Starting from the time of Zhu Yuanzhang, the treatment and salary of the ministers wasn't high. Thus, in the early days of the Great Ming Dynasty, a large number of corrupt officials appeared. At that time, they couldn't even kill all of them. There was also a very strange thing. That was, the number of people who passed the imperial examinations reached 364. However, in the second year, the number of corrupt officials who were punished also reached 364. In other words, the previous year's imperial examinations all became corrupt officials. This wasn't to say that people were greedy. It was because the salary was too low. It was so low that all the officials couldn't support themselves and their subordinates. Even if they knew the possible consequences of corruption, they still had to do it. In the end, the officials in the early days of the Ming Dynasty were actually not enough. All of this changed in the hands of the other Great Ming Dynasty's emperors. But even so, the salary was only enough to live on. Without outside wealth, it was impossible to rely on the salary to make a fortune. In comparison, Yang Chendong was much more generous. The salary that he gave the officials was enough to support their families. It wasn't a problem for them to live a wealthy life. Of course, the anti-corruption aspect was also very strict. "I've already given you such good treatment and given you so much power, but you still want more. I'm sorry, but I can only take down greedy people like you and replace you with someone else." Chapter 591. Speaking of which, the ministers of the Lanzang Kingdom looked at Yunk expectantly. Their greedy faces were all exposed. Yunk looked at those greedy faces and wanted to ask, "Do you all have any shame?" But he didn't say it out loud. He only shook his head. "No need, we don't need anyone else's help. Wanxiang City already belongs to the mercenary army. So you don't have the silver, but if you cooperate well, you can still save your lives. Their expectant faces only got them to save their lives. Everyone was instantly unhappy. What was the meaning of this? We are the ministers of the Lansang kingdom and have a lot of power in our hands. Even if we can't get 5 million silver taels like the imperial tutor who became the commander of the ministers, we should still be worth 1 million or a few 100,000 silver taels. Now, we aren't even given a single silver tael and only said that we can save our lives. Do you really think that we are weak? Do you really think that we can't do anything if we work together? The angry ministers all had ugly expressions. Some of them not only showed their dissatisfaction on their faces, but they also used their actions to get closer to Yuan. They wanted to capture this envoy and hand him over to His Majesty to receive a reward. At the very least, they could capture him and trade with the mercenary army for a large sum of silver taels. Yuan already expected that these ministers would turn hostile at any time. A cold and murderous aura flashed across his eyes and he raised his gun. One of the officials who was walking at the front was immediately shot. Blood splashed out from his chest, and then more and more blood flowed out. Finally, he was forced to the point where he lost all strength and fell to the ground with a plop. Without warning, a gunshot rang out, frightening the courtiers who were moving forward. Out of instinct, they stopped moving forward and looked at Skylark and the black pistol in his hand with a dazed expression. With their knowledge, they naturally knew that it should be a gun. But it was the first time they saw such a small gun. Especially since the power of this gun wasn't small. One shot could be fatal. While everyone was still in a daze, Yuan had already opened her mouth and said, "I didn't want to deal with you. It was you who wanted to harm me. This is called self-defense, you know? Of course, I still have 50 bullets in this pistol. Now that I've killed one person, I can still kill 49 people. If anyone wants to die, you can come forward and give it a try." It was obviously a lie. The Type 77 pistol only had a capacity of 7 rounds, but Skylark was lying through his teeth, saying that it had a capacity of 50 rounds, and was not afraid of being exposed. Not for any other reason, but because he understood people's psychology too well. Everyone was afraid of death, and no one wanted to die. This made it impossible for his lie to be exposed. Sure enough, when they heard that the pistol could fire 50 bullets at once, the faces of the officials changed drastically. Although this was somewhat beyond their understanding, and in their imagination, the flintlock had to be reloaded after firing a shot, but looking at Skylark's confident expression, no one really dared to try it. It didn't matter if no one tried it, but there were always people who reacted quickly. Usually, these people wouldn't rush to the front of everything. So in order to see if what Skylark said was true, a smart official who still wanted to control the other side said, "Don't listen to his nonsense. How can there be such a powerful gun in the world? Come, let's go together and see what he's going to do." As he spoke, he pushed the waist of one of his colleagues who was caught off guard. That person was caught off guard and rushed forward. Bang! Another gunshot sounded, and that person fell to the ground. He didn't immediately die, but he didn't look at Skylark sitting there. Instead, he looked back and wanted to see who pushed him. He wanted to *CK this person's 8 generations of ancestors. Sure enough, it can fire continuously. There were still some officials who reacted a bit slower. They didn't pay attention to how someone had the guts to test the gun. They only saw that the gun was indeed not reloaded before it fired a second shot. "I don't believe he can really fire 50 shots." It was still that person who spoke, and then he pushed the other 2 officials beside him. Bang bang! A series of gunshots sounded, and another 2 people fell to the ground. It was only a dozen meters away, so Skylark didn't need to aim at all. He only needed to shoot based on his intuition, and he could hit the target. It really is a good gun. Hey! No, those 2 people just now seem to have been pushed by someone. The officials finally reacted and finally felt that something was wrong. Immediately, they turned around and looked, and then one by one, they put up a defensive look. 3 scapegoats had already been pushed out, and no one could guarantee that they wouldn't be the next one. For safety reasons, of course, it was better to stay as far away from others as possible. 4 people had already died, and everyone had a clearer understanding of the gun in Skylark's hand. Really, no one dared to try it, so the smart people couldn't find scapegoats even if they wanted to. At this moment, the situation was deadlocked. It's so lively. A series of dense footsteps entered everyone's ears, and then a group of soldiers in military green camouflage clothes poured into the Grand Tutor's residence in rows. The one who spoke first was a young man who seemed to have a somewhat scholarly temperament. As these soldiers entered, the Lansang soldiers who were originally responsible for the safety of the Grand Tutor's residence all nervously retreated. Naturally, they had already received the notice that the mercenaries would be coming, but when they really faced them, a strong sense of pressure arose, causing them to have no choice but to retreat. Mercenaries? Is he the loyal duke? When the cold vanguard entered the courtyard, it naturally attracted everyone's attention. Then, someone shouted, and then everyone looked at the leader, 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo, with astonishment. Because of the lack of information, not many people in the Lansang Kingdom had seen Yang Chendong before. Unfortunately, some people were lucky enough to see him, but they didn't come back, and this made him a legend. He was young, and he used to be a scholar. This was the most direct impression of him. Chen Bo was very young, and he had a scholarly temperament, so it was no wonder that everyone had such an impression of him and mistook him for the Ming Dynasty's loyal duke. Originally, when he heard someone shouting the loyal duke's name, Chen Bo was also startled, thinking that the 6th young master had come here first. However, when he thought about it carefully, he realized that it was impossible. There was no need for him to take such a risk. When he saw that everyone's gaze was focused on him, he immediately smiled and said, "Everyone, the battalion commander, Chen Bo, is much younger than me." "What? How can he be younger than you?" Seeing Chen Bo deny that he was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage and say that the true Duke of Loyalty was even younger, the officials in the courtyard were all shocked. In fact, Chen Bo wasn't lying. According to his real age, he was older than Yang Chendong by 3 years. Of course, this wasn't the main point at this time. He had already seen Yun Ke in the crowd, and immediately showed a smile and greeted from afar, "Leader Yun." Yun Ke also saw Chen Bo when he and the others entered the courtyard, and he had already stood up from his chair. "Political Commissar Chen, congratulations on your promotion." Chen Bo was no longer a battalion cadre, but a regimental commander with the actual position of political commissar. But for these ruthless people who were used to killing enemies on the battlefield, they seemed to like commanding the army and preferred to be with the frontline army. From this point, Chen Bo preferred to be called battalion commander and not political commissar. But who was Yun Ke? He was the backbone of the security bureau, and he had heard this name from the 6th young master more than once. This was someone that the 6th young master valued highly, and he wasn't part of the military system, so he should be more polite. "Leader Yun, you must be joking, my political commissar position is just a title." That's because political commissar Chen doesn't care about empty titles, he has noble character and unquestionable integrity. Skylark laughed. He was worried that someone would take the risk. His pistol had already fired 4 bullets. At most, he could fire 3 more shots. Although it wouldn't take long to change the magazine, who could say that there wouldn't be any accidents? But now, the mercenaries were here, and it was the strongest Leng Feng. He could finally rest assured and leave the situation here to the Leng Feng to handle. The two of them talked as if there was no one around, as if they didn't put anyone else in their eyes. However, the other Leng Feng didn't stay idle. They went forward and grabbed the ministers of the Lansang Kingdom one by one, and once they encountered the slightest resistance, they would beat them up without mercy. If these people were Han officials, perhaps the Leng Feng would be more lenient, but sorry, they didn't have such rights if they were foreigners. Several people were beaten up because they were too slow to crouch down, and the others learned from their mistakes. They cooperated well, and the situation was quickly under control. Leader Yuan, you know the situation here better, let's see how to deal with it. Okay. Yun Ke nodded without any trace of politeness. The Leng Feng was naturally good at fighting, but when it came to seeing through people's hearts and gathering intelligence, they were far inferior to the Security Bureau. For example, he had a list of names in his hands, which showed the wealth of the captured ministers. Other than Long Qi and He Guang, the other ministers were naturally not so lucky. The situation was set, they didn't work hard before, and wanted to hug the thick thighs afterwards. Sorry, it was all too late. Yun Ke had already received Yang Chendong's secret order to confiscate the wealth of the Lan Tsang Kingdom's ministers. Of course, he wouldn't be lenient at this moment. In order to make things go smoothly, he first set his eyes on Emoda. Emoda still had some strength, at least he didn't die in the fight just now, he only suffered a knife wound. Seeing the mercenaries appear, he knew that the situation was over. He took the initiative to tuck his tail between his legs, lowered his head, and blended into the crowd. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.